Ethan's footsteps echoed through the hollow, forgotten streets of what used to be a thriving city. Now, it was just a graveyard of concrete and rusted remnants, the air thick with dust and the smell of decay. The wind whispered through broken windows, brushing against long-abandoned cars and empty storefronts, once filled with life. Now, silence reigned, except for the occasional groan of a collapsing building or the distant, hollow screech of metal scraping against the wind. As he walked, his gaze drifted to the remains of a park, once full of children's laughter, now overtaken by weeds and vines creeping up the swing set. The swings swayed slightly in the breeze, an eerie reminder of the life that once filled these streets. Ethan paused for a moment, staring at the swings as if waiting for someone to return. But no one would. They never would. He had been walking for days, alone, with no real destination other than survival. The world he had once known was gone, ripped apart in a matter of days by an outbreak that spread like wildfire. First, the chaos. People screaming, running, fighting for their lives. Then, the silence. Entire cities fell, and the world changed in the blink of an eye. Ethan had been one of the lucky ones. He remembered the last time he saw his family, their faces full of terror as they locked themselves in the house. He had left, searching for answers. He never came back. He had never heard from them again. The guilt weighed heavily on him, but he shoved those thoughts aside. They were no longer relevant. What mattered now was surviving. His stomach growled, a harsh reminder of the emptiness that had settled inside him. Food had become a distant luxury, and water was growing scarce. As he moved through the streets, he kept an eye out for anything that might be useful: cans of food, bottles of water, maybe even a fresh pair of boots. His hands brushed over abandoned objects, a child's doll, a broken smartphone, a cracked picture frame with a smiling family, each item a cruel reminder of what once was. He came across a dilapidated grocery store. The once glass doors were now shattered, the shelves inside mostly empty, save for a few cans of soup and a box of cereal. Ethan didn't even pause to check the expiration dates. He grabbed what he could, stuffing the cans into his pack. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. As he walked toward the exit, a noise stopped him dead in his tracks. It was soft, too soft. He froze, every muscle in his body going tense. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Was it a survivor? Or something worse? He glanced around, his heart hammering in his chest. No movement. The store was still empty. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, he considered turning around, retreating into the streets to escape whatever it was that he had heard. But curiosity won out. He tightened his grip on the rusted pipe he had found earlier and moved cautiously toward the back of the store. The noise came again, this time louder. A scrape, followed by a low thud. The unmistakable sound of something heavy dragging across the floor. He swallowed hard, the pipe feeling inadequate in his hands. He peered around the corner, his pulse racing. There was nothing there. Just the remnants of shelves and scattered items, all long abandoned. Yet, the sense of being watched lingered. He wasn't alone. Suddenly, a low growl filled the air, sending a jolt of fear through him. His eyes darted to the shadows in the back of the store. There, just beyond his line of sight, something shifted. His grip tightened on the pipe as he stepped forward, his breath shallow. "Please don't let it be a zombie," he muttered under his breath. The growl became a screech. A shuffle. Then, silence. Ethan waited, his heart pounding in his chest. His mind raced with possibilities. Could it be another survivor? Or was it a trap? Was he being lured into a false sense of security? He slowly crept closer, taking slow, deliberate steps. As he rounded the corner, the light revealed the source of the noise, a single dog, its fur matted and its ribs visible under its skin. The poor creature had clearly been surviving on scraps, just like him. The dog's eyes locked onto his, wide and fearful. It growled low in its throat, but didn't move. Ethan sighed in relief, lowering the pipe. He wasn't sure what to do. Should he try to help it? Or was it better to leave it to fend for itself like everything else in this world? He stood there for a long moment, staring at the dog, both of them trapped in the same broken world. Neither of them had any answers, and neither knew how to make the next step. With a soft grunt, Ethan turned and walked away, the dog's eyes following him as he retreated into the darkness. He had no time for compassion anymore. The world was too dangerous, too cruel. But a part of him felt an unexpected pang of guilt for leaving the creature behind. The silence swallowed him whole once again as he made his way to the crossroads ahead. His legs ached, and his mind was heavy with questions. What had happened to the world? Was anyone else out there? He glanced at the two paths ahead of him. One led to the highway, the other to the forest. Neither offered any promise of safety. But then, from the far-off distance, a faint sound reached his ears, a whisper, a scraping of metal. The sound that had set his heart racing earlier was back. Ethan's pulse quickened. Was it a survivor, or had the dead come looking for him? With no other option, he chose the highway, hoping it would lead to something, anything, alive. Or maybe just another sign that the world wasn't as empty as it seemed. Ethan walked briskly along the desolate highway, his boots kicking up dust with every step. The road stretched endlessly ahead, a ribbon of cracked asphalt winding through a world that had been abandoned. There was no one here, no signs of life, no movement, just the occasional rusted vehicle discarded like a forgotten toy. Nature was slowly but steadily taking back what had once been man's domain. Vines snaked up the sides of empty cars, and trees had begun to sprout from cracks in the road. The landscape was a graveyard of civilization. He tried not to look at the distant horizon. The emptiness out there had a way of swallowing him whole, amplifying the loneliness that had become his constant companion. It felt like he was walking toward nothing, with no real direction. He just needed to keep moving, needed to keep putting one foot in front of the other, to avoid the crushing weight of despair. Every now and then, he would look at his watch, even though he knew the battery had died weeks ago. Time had become irrelevant. It was just the endless march forward, hoping that at some point, there would be a break in the monotony. As he walked, he thought back to the noise he had heard earlier, the scraping sound that had frozen him in his tracks. It wasn't a zombie. It wasn't even human. But there had been something about it that unsettled him. He had brushed it off, telling himself it was just the wind or the creaking of old buildings. Yet, deep down, a nagging feeling told him that he wasn't alone. The highway seemed to stretch on forever. There were no markers, no signs, just an unbroken stretch of emptiness. The world had become so barren that even the usual landmarks had disappeared. But as Ethan moved forward, he noticed something ahead. The first sign of change in hours, a small cluster of buildings in the distance. At first, it seemed too far away to matter, but then it grew larger. His pulse quickened as he approached the cluster, realizing it was a small town. The buildings were old, weathered by time and the elements. There was a church with a collapsed steeple, a gas station with its pumps covered in moss, and several houses, each one empty, hollow, like the rest of the world. He wasn't sure why, but the sight of the town stirred something inside him. A flicker of hope, maybe, or the bitter sting of nostalgia. He didn't care what it was. All he knew was that he needed to explore, to see if there was anyone left, anyone at all. Ethan made his way toward the gas station, careful to keep his footsteps soft, his senses alert. The town was still, silent. There was no sign of life, no movement. It felt like a ghost town, nothing more than the skeleton of a place that had once known warmth, laughter, and conversation. Now, all that was left was emptiness. The gas station was in worse shape than he had anticipated. Its glass windows were shattered, and the shelves inside had been looted long ago. But there was something strange about the place. On the floor, near the counter, there was a trail of blood. Fresh blood. Ethan's breath caught in his throat, his hand instinctively reaching for the pipe at his side. His eyes scanned the store, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to be careful. This could be a trap, or worse, someone, or something, could still be here. The trail led toward the back of the station, where a door stood ajar. Ethan crept closer, his body tense, every muscle ready to spring into action at the slightest provocation. As he reached the door, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. The blood had begun to dry, turning a sickly brown. There was no sound coming from the other side. No movement. Just silence. With one swift motion, Ethan pushed the door open and stepped inside, his eyes immediately scanning the dimly lit space. The back room was cluttered with boxes and discarded items. But what caught his attention was the figure slumped in the corner, bloodied and pale, with dark red streaks staining its clothes. It was a person. Alive, but barely. Ethan's heart raced as he approached the man, whose breathing was shallow and labored. His face was gaunt, and his clothes were torn. The blood on the floor had come from his own injuries, a gash running deep along his side. The man's eyes fluttered open, and he looked up at Ethan, recognition and desperation in his gaze. "Please, help," the man whispered, his voice weak. Ethan hesitated. He had been alone for so long, he wasn't sure what to do. Trusting someone in this world could be dangerous. People were unpredictable. But the man was clearly in no condition to hurt him. He was barely clinging to life. Ethan knelt beside him, pulling out the small first aid kit he had scavenged from an old pharmacy days earlier. As he worked to stop the bleeding, the man's breathing steadied, though he remained barely conscious. "Who did this to you?" Ethan asked softly, his voice low. The man's eyes flickered for a moment, as if he were trying to find the strength to speak. His lips moved, but no words came out. He gave up after a few seconds, sinking back into unconsciousness. Ethan's mind raced. Who had done this? Was the man a victim of the infected, or something worse? There were no answers here, only more questions. He sighed, gathering his supplies. He had done what he could for now. But the truth was, helping this man might not make a difference. The world had changed, and not for the better. Survival wasn't about saving people anymore, it was about staying alive yourself. But Ethan couldn't shake the nagging thought that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the only one out there trying to survive. And that gave him a sliver of hope, no matter how fleeting. With a final glance at the unconscious man, Ethan stood, his hand gripping the pipe once more. There was no telling what dangers lay ahead, but he had to keep moving. There had to be something, someone, out there. He couldn't afford to stop now. Ethan stepped back into the fading light of the day, the highway waiting for him again, stretching toward the unknown. The night came quickly, the sky darkening like a blanket being thrown over the world. Ethan moved carefully along the highway, his footsteps muted in the soft dust of the road. The world around him felt quieter, more oppressive, as if it were holding its breath. The stillness of the night was unsettling, no wind, no creatures, no sounds of life. Just the weight of the silence pressing down on him. He had left the gas station and the injured man behind. The decision had been easy, there was nothing more he could do for the stranger. His survival came first. Even so, he couldn't shake the image of the man's pale, bloodied face. That moment lingered in his thoughts, like a shadow that followed him no matter how fast he walked. Ahead, the dim outlines of another town began to appear. This one seemed different, older somehow, with crumbling brick buildings and broken windows. The air felt heavier as he approached, like stepping into a forgotten piece of the past. Ethan's eyes narrowed, unsure of what to expect. It didn't look like a place that anyone had passed through in years. Still, something about it called to him. The first building he came upon was a small library, its wooden sign barely hanging on. He pushed the door open, the creak of the hinges louder than it should have been. The interior was dark, with only a few beams of fading light filtering in through the broken windows. The shelves were lined with dust-covered books, many of them disintegrating from age. But there was something odd about the room, a sense of familiarity that made Ethan pause. The place felt like a snapshot from a past he didn't belong to anymore. He stepped further into the room, his eyes scanning the shelves for anything useful. But then, something caught his eye. A photograph, yellowed with age, had slipped from between two books and fluttered to the ground. Ethan picked it up, his fingers brushing over the cracked surface. The photo was old, perhaps decades old, and it depicted a family standing outside this very library. The parents were smiling, their arms around two young children. A little girl with a bright smile and a boy, slightly older, looking a bit shy. Ethan stared at the image, his breath catching in his throat. The family seemed so normal, so full of life. But it was the little girl's face that struck him the most. Her eyes were so familiar. He felt an odd lump form in his throat as he stared at her. Her eyes were the same color as his. A pang of recognition flashed through him. His mind was racing, but it didn't make sense. Could this be a coincidence? This couldn't be his family. His parents had been lost long before the outbreak, and he had no memory of this place. Yet, the connection was undeniable. The haunting familiarity of the photo pulled at him, as though it held the answer to some unspoken question. He turned the photo over, hoping for some clue, some sign that would explain this strange feeling. On the back, in faded ink, were the words, "The Greys, 1989. Ethan felt a jolt of confusion. He had never heard of anyone named Gray, but the photograph stirred memories, fragments of his past he hadn't thought about in years. Was it possible that this family had once lived here, that this library was somehow connected to his past? He couldn't be sure, but the question gnawed at him. As he stood there, still clutching the photograph, he heard something, a soft rustling behind him. His body went rigid, and his hand instinctively moved toward the pipe at his side. Was someone else in the building? Had he made a mistake in thinking this place was abandoned? The sound came again. Closer this time. His eyes darted around the room, scanning every corner. His breath was shallow, his senses heightened. The silence was broken only by the faint creak of the floorboards under the weight of someone, or something, moving. He stepped cautiously toward the source of the sound, his heart pounding in his chest. The library seemed to stretch on forever in the darkness. His thoughts raced. Should he stay and investigate, or should he flee before whatever it was found him? The noise stopped abruptly, and Ethan's gut tightened. It wasn't just that the sound had ceased, it was the complete absence of movement, the unnatural stillness that followed. Suddenly, a voice cut through the silence. It was faint, almost a whisper, but unmistakable. "Ethan." The voice sent a chill down his spine. It was a name he hadn't heard in years, his name, but it wasn't possible. His body froze, and his mind began to spin. "Ethan, it's time to come home." The voice was softer now, almost gentle, like a beckoning call. His thoughts scattered as he struggled to make sense of it. Was it someone in the building? Or was it something worse, one of the infected, trying to lure him into a trap? He took a cautious step forward, his eyes scanning the shadows. The voice came again, clearer this time, closer. "Ethan, we've been waiting for you." His heart pounded in his chest. There was no denying it, someone, or something, was in the building with him. But who, or what, was it? His breath hitched as he moved through the room, the darkness wrapping around him like a suffocating blanket. "Who's there?" Ethan called out, his voice steadier than he felt. The silence hung in the air, thick and oppressive, as if waiting for an answer. The moment stretched on, the tension unbearable. Finally, a figure emerged from the shadows. A woman, dressed in tattered clothes, her eyes wide and unblinking. She stepped forward, her expression unreadable. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he saw her face. It was a face he had seen before. It was the little girl from the photograph. But how? She should have been decades older. This wasn't possible. The world had changed, and yet here she was, standing in front of him like a ghost from the past. "Ethan," she whispered again, her voice barely audible, "it's time to come home." And just like that, everything he thought he knew about this world began to crumble. Ethan took an instinctive step back, his heart pounding in his chest. The woman, no, the girl, standing before him wasn't just an apparition. She was real, but somehow wrong. Her features were those of a child, the same face from the photograph, but there was a timelessness to her eyes, an unsettling stillness that suggested she had existed far longer than she should have. "Who are you?" Ethan's voice was barely a whisper, the words thick with disbelief. The last remnants of his rational thoughts were fading fast, and a deep sense of foreboding settled in the pit of his stomach. The girl didn't answer immediately. Instead, she simply stood there, her eyes locked onto his, as if searching for something in his face. Her expression was unreadable, both vacant and expectant at the same time. The silence between them was suffocating, stretching the tension until it felt like it might snap. "I've been waiting," she said finally, her voice soft but filled with an eerie certainty. "For what?" Ethan asked, his throat dry. He couldn't tear his gaze away from her, even though every part of him screamed to turn and run. This wasn't right. None of this made sense. She took a slow step toward him, the faint sound of her bare feet shuffling against the dust-covered floor the only noise in the room. "For you," she whispered. "You're supposed to remember." A cold shiver ran down his spine. He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. The image of the family in the photo flashed through his mind again. The mother, the father, the boy, and the girl. His breath caught in his throat as the pieces began to fall together, though none of them seemed to fit. There was a pull to the girl, a haunting familiarity, like she was somehow tethered to his past, a past he had buried long ago. "Remember what?" Ethan choked out, his voice trembling now, unable to stop himself from stepping back further into the library. "You don't remember," the girl said, her eyes never leaving his. "But you will." Her words hung in the air like a curse, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a genuine surge of fear. He wanted to leave, wanted to run from this place that felt more like a dream, or worse, a nightmare, than reality. But something held him there, some invisible force he couldn't explain. "What do you want from me?" Ethan asked, his voice shaking with frustration. He could feel the walls of the library closing in on him, the air thick and heavy. His pulse quickened, every instinct telling him to flee. The girl tilted her head slightly, as if considering him. "We've been waiting," she repeated, her voice more insistent now. "The others are waiting too." "The others?" Ethan repeated, his mind racing. "What others?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she turned and gestured toward the back of the library, where shadows lingered, and the dim light couldn't quite reach. A creeping sense of dread washed over him as he followed her gaze. In the darkened corner, something shifted. It was subtle, but it was there. A movement, a figure, standing motionless in the shadows. Ethan's throat tightened as he squinted into the darkness, trying to make out the shape. "Who is that?" Ethan demanded, but the girl didn't respond. She simply began to walk toward the figure, her small, ghost-like form gliding across the floor as though she were part of the shadows herself. He felt a surge of panic. The atmosphere in the room had grown suffocating, thick with something unspoken, something sinister. He turned, his feet already moving before he could consciously decide to flee. But his body froze. The figure in the shadows, it was coming toward him. Slowly, it emerged from the darkness. Another child. This one, a boy, slightly older than the girl, his face as pale as hers, his eyes vacant and wide. His hands were clasped in front of him, his expression frozen in a look of haunting emptiness. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "No, no," he whispered, backing away further. The boy didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone sent a wave of dread crashing through Ethan's mind, like the weight of everything that had gone wrong in this world manifesting in a single moment. It felt wrong, unnatural. "You see," the girl said, her voice floating in the air like a lullaby, "we're all waiting for you to come home. You've been gone too long." Ethan's breath caught in his throat as the pieces clicked into place, but he didn't want to believe it. He refused to believe it. "No," he gasped. "This isn't real. You're not real." But the boy took another step forward, his movements slow and deliberate. Ethan felt his knees weaken, the air too thick to breathe. He couldn't look away, couldn't move. The world around him felt like it was spinning, the library warping into something unrecognizable. "You don't belong out there anymore, Ethan," the girl said softly, almost sweetly. "Not with the others. You've come too far. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, to shout, to run, but his voice caught in his throat. The weight of her words crushed him, and all he could do was stare at the two figures, as though they were pulling him into their world, a world that had been lost long ago. Come home with us, Ethan, the girl repeated, her voice softening, the eerie allure undeniable. It's safe here. It's where you belong. Suddenly, the air around him thickened further, and the once familiar room twisted into something foreign and nightmarish. The walls stretched and warped, the shadows deepening into suffocating darkness. Ethan could feel himself being drawn toward them, his body betraying him, his will weakening with every step he took toward the two figures. No, he had to fight this. He couldn't give in to whatever this was. He turned abruptly and bolted for the door, his legs pumping with all the strength he had left. Behind him, the girl's voice echoed softly in the distance, her words trailing off like a fading dream. Come home. Ethan didn't look back as he burst out of the library and into the night. His breath came in ragged gasps as he sprinted into the dark, not caring which direction he ran. He just needed to get away. Far away. But the question burned in his mind as he ran, what if they were right? What if this place, this time, was where he truly belonged? But he couldn't stop. Not yet. Not until he was sure he could outrun the ghosts of his past. Ethan ran through the night, his lungs burning, each breath shallow and quick. The cold air bit at his skin, but he barely noticed. The only thing that mattered was putting distance between himself and the ghosts that haunted that library. The girl. The boy. That place, everything about it had felt wrong, as if the very fabric of reality had been distorted, twisting his memories, his perception of what was real. But the more he ran, the more that voice echoed in his head. Come home. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The figures, the familiarity of the photograph, the unsettling connection that pulled at him like a chain. There was no way it could be real. No way those children could be the ones from the picture. But as the miles passed beneath his feet, doubt crept in. He couldn't shake the feeling that everything was connected in ways he couldn't yet understand. His footsteps slowed as exhaustion set in. He glanced behind him, half expecting to see those pale faces chasing after him, or worse, something far darker. But there was nothing. Just the endless emptiness of the road. The world seemed silent, and yet it wasn't. There was always a hum beneath it all, the distant groan of buildings decaying, the quiet whisper of wind through broken windows, the ever-present reminder of the destruction that had swept through the country. This was the new normal, the dead America. The old world was gone, swallowed whole by the disaster, and now it was just him. Alone. A bitter laugh escaped him. He didn't know what he was even searching for anymore. What was left to find? He had seen so many empty towns, heard the whispers of voices that had never belonged to the living. Was he just wandering, chasing after ghosts of the past, or was he chasing something far worse? He stopped, his legs too weary to take another step. The night sky above him was vast, stretching endlessly, unbroken by the flickering lights of civilization. His fingers brushed the photograph in his pocket, the one from the library, the family smiling, the children's faces too familiar to be a coincidence. Who were they? He wondered, and more importantly, who was he? A flash of movement to his left jerked him from his thoughts. His body tensed, his hand instantly reaching for the pipe at his side. He didn't know what he was looking at, but something had caught his attention. The silhouette of a person stood in the distance, partially obscured by the darkened trees. It was too far away to make out clearly, but there was no mistaking it, a figure. Slowly, Ethan moved toward the figure, his heart hammering in his chest. Was it another survivor? Or something else? He stepped forward cautiously, his gaze never leaving the silhouette. With each step, the figure became clearer, another person, walking slowly, almost methodically. The stranger didn't seem to notice him at first. But as Ethan closed the distance, the figure turned and looked directly at him. The face was unfamiliar, but there was something haunting about the expression. Pale, with hollow eyes that seemed to have seen too much, and a face devoid of emotion. Ethan froze, suddenly unsure of what to do. The figure didn't speak, but its gaze locked with his, as if it were trying to communicate something with its eyes. Something urgent. Something desperate. "Who are you?" Ethan called out, his voice rough from the hours of running. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it started to move toward him, its footsteps slow but purposeful. Ethan's breath quickened as it closed the gap. There was something unnerving about the way it moved, as though it wasn't fully alive, like a shadow walking in the shape of a person. "Stay back," Ethan said, his voice firmer now, his grip tightening around the pipe. "Who are you?" The figure stopped just a few feet away, its eyes still locked onto his. And then, without warning, it spoke, its voice low and hoarse, like it hadn't spoken in years. "They're watching you," it whispered, its voice barely more than a rasp. Ethan's blood ran cold. "Who's watching me?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, it pointed to the horizon, toward the line of trees that loomed in the distance. Ethan followed its gaze, but all he saw was the same endless night, the darkness swallowing everything. There was nothing out there. "Stay away from the woods," the figure said, its voice trembling with fear. "They're not what they seem. Don't go there." Ethan's mind raced, but before he could ask anything else, the figure turned and began walking away, its movements as deliberate and lifeless as before. "Wait!" Ethan shouted, but the figure didn't respond. It continued walking, heading back toward the edge of the forest, until it was swallowed by the shadows, vanishing without a trace. Ethan stood there, stunned, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Who was that person? What did they mean by "they're watching you"? And why had they warned him about the woods? He stood for a long moment, the weight of the warning pressing down on him. The idea of the woods, the darkness beyond, pulled at him, tempting him, as if there was something there that he needed to understand. The stranger's words echoed in his mind, but a part of him resisted the urge to investigate. He had learned, through painful experience, that curiosity in this new world often led to death. But another part of him, the part that had been pushing forward through this nightmare without a real destination, urged him to go. There had to be something out there, some answer, some reason for this madness. The decision weighed heavily on him. Every fiber of his being screamed to avoid the woods, to stay away from whatever darkness lurked within. But the curiosity that had driven him this far, the unrelenting desire to find answers, gnawed at him. He turned toward the forest, the trees dark and menacing in the moonlight. The wind had picked up, rustling the leaves in a way that sounded almost like whispers, as if the forest itself were calling to him. He took a deep breath. "I have to know," he muttered to himself. And so, with no more hesitation, Ethan began to walk toward the woods. The path was unclear, the air heavy with an unnatural stillness, but he pressed forward. The further he walked, the more the world seemed to warp around him, distorted, like a nightmare trying to devour him whole. The woods were waiting. The trees loomed like towering giants, their twisted branches reaching for the sky, blocking out most of the pale moonlight. The air grew heavier the deeper Ethan ventured into the forest, thick with the scent of decaying wood and earth. Each step he took felt like he was sinking deeper into a world that didn't quite belong to the one he had known. The sound of his footsteps was muffled by the damp soil, swallowed by the eerie silence that surrounded him. As he walked further into the forest, the temperature seemed to drop. His breath came in visible puffs, a sign that something wasn't right. The world felt wrong. There was an oppressive weight in the air, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The deeper he went, the more he could feel the hairs on the back of his neck prickle, a sense of being watched settling over him like a thick cloak. Every instinct told him to turn back, to get out of the woods before whatever haunted this place found him. But the warning from the strange figure, had planted a seed in his mind, one that urged him to press on. They were watching him. And whatever they were, whatever was hidden in this forest, it seemed to hold the key to the questions that had been tormenting him. What happened to the world? Why had everything fallen apart so suddenly? And why was he so connected to that photograph, that family he'd never met, that girl who had called him home? Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the trees. Ethan froze, his breath catching in his throat. His eyes darted to the surrounding shadows, searching for the source of the noise. Had something followed him? Was it the strange figure again? He waited in silence, listening. The forest seemed to hold its breath once more. The seconds stretched on, too long. His hand gripped the pipe tighter, knuckles white from the pressure. He strained his ears for any sound, anything that might give him a clue about what was out there. Then, another sound. Faint, almost like a whisper. But not from the wind. It came from ahead, deeper in the woods. "Ethan," the voice whispered. His blood ran cold. That voice, it was the same as the girl's from the library, the same as the voice he had heard before. His heart pounded in his chest as he took a cautious step forward. The voice was calling to him again, but this time, it was different. There was something far more sinister in the tone, something that made his skin crawl. He couldn't explain why, but every fiber of his being told him to turn around and flee. But still, he couldn't stop himself. The pull of that voice, the pull of whatever lay ahead, was too strong. It was as if he were being guided, led into the heart of the darkness by forces he couldn't comprehend. He moved slowly, careful not to make a sound, his senses heightened to their breaking point. The trees closed in on him, their twisted forms like skeletal hands reaching for him, brushing against his arms as he passed. Every step felt heavier, like the forest itself was becoming more oppressive, more alive. The voice came again, clearer this time, the whisper growing louder. "Ethan. You're almost here." He shivered. This wasn't a person. It couldn't be. No living person would be out here, calling to him in the dead of night, in this forsaken forest. But it felt real. The voice wasn't just in his head, it was tangible, echoing in the air around him, wrapping itself around his thoughts. Another crack, this time much closer. Ethan spun around, his heart racing. The shadows shifted. There was movement. He wasn't alone. A figure appeared through the trees, its form barely visible in the dim light. It was hunched, distorted, like a broken man trying to stand. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the shape. It wasn't human. It was something else. The figure was tall, impossibly so, its limbs too long for a normal body. Its skin was pale, stretched tight over its bones, and its face was a twisted mockery of humanity. There were no eyes, only blackened sockets, and its mouth was gaping wide, lined with jagged teeth that seemed to grin at him, though no expression of emotion was visible. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. His body froze as the figure took a step toward him, its movement jerky, unnatural. It spoke, but the voice wasn't human. It was guttural, more animal than man. "Ethan," it rasped, the sound like nails scraping across stone. "You've come home." The words sent a shock of terror through Ethan's spine. This was no coincidence. This was no chance encounter. The things he had been hearing, the whispers, the eerie calls, it was all leading to this moment, this confrontation. But why? Why was he being drawn into this madness? The creature took another step forward, its limbs twisting in impossible angles. Ethan's breath was quickening now, panic rising in his chest. He wanted to run, wanted to scream, but he couldn't move. His body was paralyzed with fear, caught in the gaze of this nightmarish being. "You belong to us," the creature hissed, its voice slithering through the air like poison. Ethan's pulse raced as the figure loomed closer. Its mouth opened wide, revealing rows of sharp teeth, as it made a slow, deliberate move toward him. He could feel the weight of its presence, the darkness pressing in on him from all sides. With every ounce of strength left in him, Ethan broke free from the paralysis and spun around, sprinting as fast as he could. His legs burned, his chest ached, but he didn't dare slow down. The forest seemed to close in around him, the trees bending and twisting, as if the very landscape was alive and chasing him. A scream tore from his throat as the air grew thick with an unnatural chill. The voice called to him again, but this time, it wasn't the girl's voice. It was the creature's, distorted and grating. "You can't escape. You've already come too far." But Ethan didn't stop. His feet pounded against the earth, his breath ragged as he pushed through the darkness. The twisted trees seemed to move around him, closing in, but he refused to look back. The sound of something large and heavy following him echoed behind him, growing louder with each passing moment. The forest seemed endless, but he kept running, driven by a single thought: escape. Suddenly, he burst out of the tree line, the open road ahead of him. The moonlight was a beacon in the distance, but it felt like safety, his only chance. He sprinted toward it, ignoring the exhaustion in his legs, his lungs burning as he pushed himself forward. When his feet finally hit the asphalt, he dared to glance back. The forest stood dark and silent behind him, the shadows now still, unmoving. The figure, whatever it was, had stopped pursuing him. For now. Ethan didn't know what he had just encountered, whether it was real or some twisted nightmare. But one thing was certain: something in that forest, something ancient and malevolent, was waiting for him. Waiting for him to come back. He couldn't stay here. He couldn't afford to. But the pull of that place, of the dark heart of the woods, was already growing stronger. And so, Ethan began to walk away from the forest, deeper into the unknown, wondering how much longer he could outrun the darkness. The road stretched endlessly before Ethan, its asphalt cracked and weathered, much like the world around him. His feet pounded against it, the rhythm of his steps a sharp contrast to the heavy silence that hung in the air. The forest was behind him now, the darkened trees a silhouette against the pale moonlight, but he could still feel its pull. The memory of the creature, the voice that had followed him, gnawed at him relentlessly. He didn't know what he had just witnessed, or what it meant, but deep inside, he felt a cold certainty: his past, his connection to the world, was tied to that forest, and to whatever haunted its depths. The cold wind whipped around him as he walked, but it wasn't the wind that made him shiver. It was the weight of the unknown, the heavy feeling that no matter how far he traveled, it would follow him. The deeper he went into this ruined world, the more certain he became: something had happened long before the apocalypse. Something personal, something that felt so familiar, yet just out of reach. As the hours passed, the fatigue began to set in. His legs burned, his vision blurred at the edges. He needed to rest, to think, to process what had just happened. But he couldn't stop. The sense of urgency gnawed at him. He was so close, closer than ever to the truth. In the distance, a shape appeared. A small building, dilapidated, its roof caved in on one side, windows shattered, but it was a structure, a place to seek shelter. Ethan made his way toward it, every step feeling heavier as his exhaustion settled in his bones. The building had once been a gas station, or perhaps a convenience store, now reduced to little more than a skeleton of its former self. The sign above the door was barely legible, the letters obscured by layers of grime and soot. But there was something about it that called to him, like a familiar landmark in a dream, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this place had a purpose. He pushed open the door, the rusted hinges groaning in protest, and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, the shelves long abandoned and picked clean by scavengers. But there was something else here, something strange. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as he stepped further inside. His eyes scanned the room, but nothing seemed out of place, except for the coldness, an unsettling chill that clung to the air. And then, he saw it. A picture, framed and sitting on one of the dusty shelves. It was the same family from the photograph in the library. The parents, the children, their faces burned into his memory. He had seen them before, had wondered about them. But here they were, staring at him from the photograph, as if they had been waiting for him to find them. His heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just a coincidence. The connection was real. These people, whoever they were, had been following him, or he had been following them. He didn't know which. But this photo, this moment, was somehow central to everything that had happened. Ethan approached the picture slowly, his mind racing. He reached out, his fingers brushing the glass. The photo was old, faded, but the faces were clear, too clear. He couldn't explain why, but it felt like a part of him recognized them, like he had always known them. His pulse quickened, and for a moment, he wondered if he was going crazy. Was he losing himself in the madness of the world, grasping at straws in the dark? Or was there something truly supernatural at work here? Something beyond the understanding of any sane mind? Before he could inspect the photo further, a voice broke the silence. "You've been looking for answers, haven't you?" Ethan spun around, his heart slamming into his chest. Standing in the doorway was a woman, her face pale and drawn, her eyes dark circles beneath them. She looked exhausted, as if she hadn't seen the sun in years, but there was something familiar about her too. A sense of recognition flickered in his mind, but he couldn't place it. He had never seen this woman before. But she knew him. And somehow, she knew everything. "You're him," she said, her voice trembling. "You're the one they've been waiting for." Ethan took a cautious step toward her. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice strained with suspicion. She stepped into the room, her movements slow, deliberate. "My name is Sarah. And I know you. You've been here before." Ethan's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" "I've never been here." Sarah's eyes darkened, and she looked away, as if struggling with something painful. "You've been running for so long, Ethan. You don't remember, do you? You don't remember what happened before." He felt his breath catch. "Before?" She nodded. "Before the world ended. Before everything changed. Before you lost yourself." Ethan's mind reeled. Lost himself? What was she talking about? "The girl," Sarah whispered, as if the words were too heavy to speak aloud. "The girl you saw in the library. She's not just a memory. She's a part of you, Ethan. She's the key to everything." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? Who is she? And what does this have to do with me?" Sarah looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling. She's your daughter." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. His breath left him in a rush, and for a moment, the world seemed to spin. A daughter? He had no memory of a daughter. No memory of ever having a family. The weight of the world seemed to crash down on him all at once. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. I don't." Sarah's voice was soft but insistent. "You've forgotten, Ethan. They erased your memory. Everything before the outbreak, everything about your family, it was all taken from you. But the girl, she's been trying to find you. Trying to bring you home." The room seemed to close in on him as he processed her words. His hands shook, and he reached for the photo, turning it over in his hands as if looking for an explanation. But the photo gave him no answers. It only deepened the mystery, confirming the terrifying truth that was slowly sinking into his chest. He wasn't just a survivor. He wasn't just some wanderer in the wasteland. He was someone else entirely. And the answers were still out there, waiting for him to remember. Ethan stumbled back, his mind reeling, as Sarah watched him with sad, knowing eyes. "You've come home," she whispered, her voice barely audible, as if the words were meant for him alone. Ethan didn't know whether to run or stay. He didn't know where to go or what to believe anymore. But one thing was certain, his journey was far from over. And the truth was far darker than he could ever have imagined. The wind howled outside, rattling the broken windows of the gas station. Ethan could feel the weight of Sarah's words pressing down on him like a suffocating cloud. His heart raced, the world spinning around him as he tried to make sense of everything she had just said. A daughter? Memory erased? It felt impossible, too much to comprehend, yet something deep inside him stirred, like a distant memory, too faint to grasp but undeniable in its presence. Sarah's eyes never left him. She looked at him with a mix of sorrow and hope, as if she was waiting for something, for him to remember something he had lost. But Ethan couldn't remember. All he knew was that he was utterly lost in this broken world, chasing after ghosts that might not even exist. "I don't understand," he said hoarsely, gripping the frame of the photo tightly. Why can't I remember? What happened to me? To my family?" Sarah stepped closer, her hands trembling at her sides. "You were part of something, Ethan. Something they wanted to erase. You were meant to be the protector, the one who kept everything in place. But they took it all from you, your memories, your family, your purpose. A chill ran through him as her words sank in. He had always felt like there was something missing, something just beyond his reach. Now, it was clear. It wasn't just the world that had fallen apart. It was him, too. His mind reeled back to the things he had seen, the shadows in the trees, the whispers in the wind, the strange figures that lurked just beyond his understanding. Everything was starting to weave together, like a tapestry of broken pieces that couldn't quite fit, but were desperately trying to. They, Ethan muttered, his voice thick with disbelief. Who are they? And why would they erase my memories? What do they want from me? Sarah hesitated, as if the answer would hurt too much to say. They are the ones who caused this, she whispered, her voice trembling. The outbreak, the collapse, the death of everything you knew. They're the reason the world fell apart. And they're the ones who put you on this path. Ethan's stomach twisted. The outbreak, the collapse, the death of everything? He had always thought of the apocalypse as a random, terrible event, something that couldn't have been predicted or stopped. But now, Sarah was telling him it had been orchestrated. He had been a part of it. A part of something that had doomed the world. His head felt heavy, and for a moment, he wondered if the madness had finally caught up with him. Was this all real, or was it just the last threads of his sanity slipping away? I didn't ask for any of this, he muttered, his voice raw. I didn't choose this. Sarah's gaze softened. None of us did. But it's the reality we're stuck in. And now, you have to make a choice. Ethan's heart skipped. A choice? She nodded slowly, her face pale. You can't outrun this forever. The girl, your daughter, she's in danger. They've been looking for her, because of what she is. And they'll stop at nothing to find her. Ethan's throat tightened. His daughter? The girl in the photo, the girl who had been calling to him, who had somehow known where to find him. It was all connected. She wasn't just a victim in this world, she was the key. Where is she? He asked urgently. Where do I find her? Sarah hesitated, looking down at her hands. She seemed to struggle with her next words, as if they weighed heavily on her. I don't know exactly. But I do know she's close, closer than you think. She's been tracking you, leading you here. But she's in danger, Ethan. And if you don't get to her first, they will. Ethan felt a surge of panic. Who were these people? Who were these faceless enemies who wanted to use his daughter as a pawn in their twisted game? And what did they want with her? He gripped the edge of the counter, his mind racing. There was so much at stake now. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about saving the last fragment of family he had left, the girl who called him home. The girl, she's my daughter, Ethan repeated, the words tasting foreign on his tongue. But I don't even remember her. Sarah's eyes softened with understanding. The memory will come back. But not yet. Right now, the most important thing is finding her. You don't have time. They're coming for her. Ethan's pulse quickened. The weight of her words hit him like a ton of bricks. His daughter was out there, somewhere in this ruined world, and he was the only one who could save her. He didn't know how, or where to start, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he couldn't fail her. The thought of failing, of losing her, made his chest tighten with dread. He wasn't the man he used to be. He wasn't the protector he once had been. But he had to be now. For her. For the family he had lost. Where do I start? He asked, his voice firm despite the chaos spinning in his mind. Sarah took a deep breath, her expression grim. There's a place. A facility. It's where they've been holding her. But getting there won't be easy. The path is dangerous. The things you'll have to face will test everything you are. Ethan's heart raced. I don't care. I'll do whatever it takes. For a moment, Sarah just stared at him, and then she nodded slowly. You're stronger than you know, Ethan. But be careful. They'll do anything to stop you. They'll try to turn you against her. They'll try to make you believe she's the enemy. Ethan clenched his fists. I won't let them. Sarah's eyes met his, and there was something in her gaze that told him she knew he would succeed. But there was also a warning, an unspoken truth that lingered between them. This is your last chance, she said quietly. Once you step onto that path, there's no going back. You will either save her, or you will lose everything. The weight of her words settled in his chest, cold and heavy. But he wasn't afraid anymore. His purpose had finally crystallized in the chaos of the world around him. It was clear now. The girl was the key to everything. And he wasn't going to let anyone take her from him. With a final look at Sarah, Ethan turned, his eyes focused on the road ahead. It was time to find his daughter. Time to face whatever darkness awaited him, and end this nightmare once and for all. There was no turning back. Ethan's footsteps were deliberate, each one a drumbeat of resolve in the eerie silence of the broken world around him. His chest tightened as he moved through the desolation, the wind whipping through the skeletal remains of buildings and abandoned vehicles. The dark sky overhead seemed to stretch endlessly, an oppressive void above him as he walked, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Every step was a step closer to her. His daughter. The girl he couldn't remember, but who was undeniably a part of him. Sarah's warning echoed in his mind, they'll try to turn you against her. They'll make you believe she's the enemy. But nothing would stop him. He knew his mission now. He knew his purpose. He was going to find her, no matter what it took. As he ventured deeper into the ruins, the landscape seemed to grow more foreboding. The wind howled with a strange intensity, and the trees, long since dead, loomed like twisted figures in the distance. The world felt empty, as though the very air was holding on to a secret, waiting for him to uncover it. The path Sarah had given him was a narrow one, winding through forgotten streets and abandoned neighborhoods. He followed it without hesitation, driven by something deep within him, a primal instinct that told him he was on the right path, even as the world seemed to close in around him. Then, in the distance, he saw it. A massive compound loomed ahead, surrounded by high, rusted fences. The place was deserted, at least, that's what it appeared to be, but the ominous silence only made it more unsettling. Ethan knew this was where they were keeping her. The girl who had been calling to him, whose image had haunted his every step. She was here, somewhere within this cold fortress. He approached cautiously, blending into the shadows, his heart thundering in his chest. The silence was suffocating now, as though the world had paused, waiting. There were no sounds of movement, no guards patrolling, no signs of life at all. But Ethan knew better than to trust appearances. Whatever had happened here, it wasn't over. It never was. He slipped through a gap in the fence, the rusted metal scraping against his skin, and crept forward. The compound was large, more like a research facility than a prison, and the walls were thick, reinforced with concrete. The windows were covered in grime, offering no glimpse of what lay inside. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he reached the door. His hand hovered over the handle, the cold metal biting into his palm. He could feel it, the weight of the moment, the finality of it. If he stepped through that door, there was no going back. There was no room for hesitation. Taking a deep breath, he turned the handle and entered. The interior was dark, the air thick with the smell of decay. The walls were lined with empty rooms, their doors hanging open as though they had been abandoned in haste. The faint hum of machinery echoed through the halls, and Ethan knew that he wasn't alone. He could feel the presence of something, or someone, watching him, waiting. Ethan. The voice was soft, barely a whisper, but it sent a shiver down his spine. It was her. His daughter. He turned toward the sound, his heart racing, and saw a figure standing in the doorway at the end of the hall. The girl. She was just a silhouette in the dim light, but Ethan knew it was her. His heart surged with an emotion he couldn't name, a fierce protective love mixed with a profound sense of loss. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling. "I knew you'd come." He took a step forward, but then the door behind him slammed shut with a deafening crash. The sound echoed through the building, and Ethan spun around to face the new threat. From the shadows, figures emerged, tall, masked, and clad in dark uniforms. They moved with an eerie precision, surrounding him in a circle. The air grew thick with tension, and Ethan's instincts screamed that this was it. This was the moment. The leader of the group stepped forward, his voice cold and calculating. "You shouldn't have come here, Ethan. You've just sealed your fate." Ethan's jaw clenched. He didn't know who these people were, but he knew one thing: they were the ones who had been responsible for the world's destruction. They had created this nightmare, and they had stolen his memories, his family. Now they wanted to take his daughter from him, too. The leader continued, his eyes cold and unfeeling. "You were never meant to find her. She's the key to everything, and you've just made a huge mistake." "No," Ethan growled, his voice low and full of defiance. "I won't let you take her." The figures moved in closer, but before they could make their move, a gunshot rang out, echoing through the building. The leader flinched, his hand going to his chest where a small trickle of blood appeared. His eyes widened in shock as he fell to the ground. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan turned, his breath catching in his throat, and saw Sarah standing at the far end of the hall, her hand still raised from where she had fired. She was holding a gun, steady, unwavering. Her eyes were full of determination, but there was something else there too, something fragile, like she had been waiting for this moment for far too long. "You don't have to do this," Sarah said, her voice steady, but there was a deep sorrow in her eyes. "You don't have to be a part of their plan, Ethan. Let her go. She deserves a chance at life." Ethan stared at her, conflicted. This wasn't the time for questions. There was no room for hesitation now. The leader's men were regrouping, closing in. With a final glance at his daughter, Ethan made a decision. He lunged forward, grabbing her by the wrist and pulling her close. "We're getting out of here," he said, his voice resolute. The girl nodded, her eyes filled with something he hadn't seen before, hope. Together, they ran. They burst through the hall, past the guards who were struggling to regroup, and headed toward the exit. The world outside was dark, but it felt more real than anything inside the compound. The weight of the mission was still heavy, but now there was a spark, a glimmer of light. Ethan didn't know where they would go next. He didn't know what the future held. But he knew one thing. He wasn't alone anymore. And as long as they had each other, they could survive anything. The last chapter of the apocalypse was yet to be written. But Ethan was ready to face it, whatever came next.